The ex-husband of a once popular and now convicted mommy blogger is back in the spotlight as he calls on lawmakers to make changes to Utah's child welfare laws and speaking out on professional licensing in the state. It's a move that comes after a tumultuous series of events over the last couple of years for the influencers who ran the now defunct YouTube channel 8 Passengers. We're talking about Ruby and Kevin Franke. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Kevin Franke is certainly speaking out in a major way. And even before we get into what he told Utah lawmakers, I want to give you some context on this story, some background. This is a story we have been following very closely here on Sidebar. It all started a few years back when then married Kevin and Ruby Franke rose to YouTube fame for their family vlog channel 8 Passengers, which gave parenting, religious, and other family life advice for their growing number of followers. It also logged the life of them and their 6 children. And by the time the channel was shut down in 2023, it had reached nearly 2.5 million subscribers. But as we know, Ruby teamed up with self-proclaimed therapist and life coach Jodi Hildebrandt, who appeared to put a wedge between Kevin and Ruby, along with allegedly countless other couples over the years, through her marriage and life counseling. This was through her business, Connections Classroom. The core teaching of Connections focuses on having true connection with others, that one must not be in a distortion through addiction, living in shame or denial, being codependent, or living in lust. There was among other things. Now, Ruby seemed to fall under Jodi's wing, and the pair teamed up, creating a partnership online, which seemingly pushed Kevin out of the picture and led to an official separation. Now, somewhere along the way, people began questioning some of Ruby's tactics in her videos.
Eve did not pack a lunch today, and can I bring a lunch over to the school? This happens quite often when you're raising children, because I know that her teacher is uncomfortable with her being hungry and not having a lunch, and it would ease her discomfort if I came to the school with a lunch. But I responded and just said, Eve is responsible for making her lunches in the morning, and she actually told me she did pack a lunch. So the natural outcome is she's just going to need to be hungry.
And more followers started noticing what appeared to be pretty extreme forms of punishment.
My bedroom was taken away for 7 months, and then you give it back like a couple weeks ago.
I don't think our viewers know that.
You've been sleeping on a beanbag.
I've been sleeping on a beanbag since October, and they gave my room back like 2 weeks ago. Oh, I'll give you the reason why I lost my bedroom. I think so. I think this is the reason. At least this is the reason that's been in my head. It's pretty funny, but now that I look back, I mean, it's pretty depressing.
No, we never told our viewers.
That I woke Russell up at 2 in the morning and told him that we're going to Disneyland and he has to pack. And he got up and made his bed all neatly and then packed all his clothes in a suitcase. And then he walked out the door and I'm like, Russell, he was like, what? And he's all happy. Has his sunglasses on. And I was like, we're not going to Disneyland. And he started crying and hitting me. And then he went back to bed in tears, and then...
So that was not the reason you lost your room, but that was...
Well, the other reason is because I pointed a BB gun at his face.
Pointed a BB gun at his face and hung him on the basketball. It's not funny. Basically, Chad...
That was like the day I got home, too.
Chad came home from Anasazi and...
Russell was like, I want to try junking the basketball, and I lifted him up on the rim. And left him there for like all 3 minutes, and he was just hanging on there.
Do you think it's funny? Because
and then I walk out.
If you think it's funny, then that was 7 months ago. Maybe you need longer without a bedroom.
No, it was not funny.
Ruby's oldest daughter, Sherry, requested a welfare check on Ruby's house in the fall of 2022 after a neighbor reportedly said her siblings were left home alone for about 5 days. That's according to police reports. And then things sadly escalated from there.
911, the address of your emergency. Tell me exactly what's happened.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here at my front door asking for help. This kid has obviously been... I think he's been detained. He's obviously covered in wounds. We need the cops here as soon as possible.
Hey, everybody, we'll get you right back to this in a minute, but I do want to thank Upside for sponsoring this episode of Sidebar. Always appreciate their support to make this happen. Upside is a free app that gets you cash back on daily essentials like gas, groceries, dinings. So when I pump my own gas, yes, I do it on my own. I have no valet over here. When I do, I can use the free Upside app, and why not get cash back when you fill up your tank, right? And yes, this is actual real cash back, no confusing rewards or points or credits, just actual money you can transfer straight to your bank account. So once you have the app, you claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside, you pay as usual using a debit or credit card, and you follow the steps on the app and you get paid. And as you saw me just do, you can use Upside at places like Shell, Exxon, Mobil, 7-Eleven, Sunoco, restaurants like Chipotle, Papa John's, Dairy Queen, Domino's, KFC, Taco Bell. That's just to name a few, by the way. Now, to find out how much you can earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen and use our promo code SIDEBAR and you'll get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. That's promo code SIDEBAR for an extra 25 cents back on your first gallon of gas. It was discovered the two youngest Franke children had been severely physically and emotionally and mentally abused and neglected at Jodi's South Utah home. Both Ruby and Jodi, they were arrested on 6 felony child abuse charges, ultimately pleading guilty and sentenced to prison. The Franke's 4 minor children were placed into state custody. Reporting indicates that Kevin has been actively trying to get custody of them back. By the way, he's estranged now from Ruby Franke. And that brings us to what happened now, because Kevin spoke to lawmakers on Tuesday. This was ahead of a public meeting of the Child Welfare Legislative Oversight Panel, where top officials with the Utah Division of Child and Family Services were asked to give details on the Franke case. And he's calling on lawmakers to change how police and DCFS investigate cases of abuse. Local media reported that Kevin says there are just too many loopholes in the system, too many loopholes which made it easy for Ruby and her business partner Jodi to hide what was going on with his kids after their separation. And before the panel heard the details of the Franke case, Kevin made a statement.
Ms. Jodi Hildebrandt, a professionally licensed mental health counselor in the state of Utah, knew the Utah child welfare system like the back of her hand, including its rules, its limitations, and its loopholes. Jodi convinced my wife that the government wanted to rip religious families like ours apart and indoctrinate our children with secular teachings. I've come to learn that Jodi masterfully coached Ruby in navigating the child welfare loopholes in this state. In a nutshell, all they had to do were 3 things. 1, keep the children isolated from the world. 2, ignore all the phone calls from DCFS caseworkers. And 3, not answer the door when DCFS and/or police officers knocked. That's it.
Actually, we kind of saw that, because look at how Ruby behaved when police arrested her.
Just place your hands on your back for me. Perfect. And then right now I can put a finger in each of these, okay? And I'm just going to double up this so they don't tighten up on you on the way out there. Where's your car?
It's out there.
Yeah.
By the command.
You don't have anything on you that I should know about, correct? Any weapons, anything that we're going to find. Before you put you in a police vehicle, we need to search your person to make sure you don't have anything on you. Is there anything you have on you? Okay, I'm going to search you before we put you in his car. That's just protocol, so I'm just going to have you step right over here and then just widen your legs, widen your stance. Yep, perfect. Are you wearing a bra? Okay, I'm just going to go like this through and make sure you don't have anything. You said you're not wearing a bra? Okay.
In fact, she admitted in a later jailhouse recording that she purposely didn't say anything to law enforcement. Even when she was brought to the station, she's really not cooperative.
Do you live down here or? Or do you live up north? Do you want to talk to me about where you live or how many kids you have? So we just spoke with your husband, and he said you guys have 6 kids. Are those all together? Are those all your kids?
And Kevin also said that reports by friends or family members should be enough for officials to get involved without additional evidence of abuse.
There was not sufficient evidence based on our current laws for government to intervene despite the clear red flags recognized and reported by our close friends and neighbors and family as well. This allowed Jodi and Ruby to emotionally and physically terrorize my children behind closed doors.
He told the panel that his daughter Sherry was told that they have never removed children from abusive homes due to emotional abuse, despite being more rampant than physical abuse cases.
We cannot allow religious extremism to be an acceptable cover and shield for child abuse in this state.
He told lawmakers he even recalled Jodi coaching him to avoid DCFS, warning that they wanted to rip his family apart. And by the way, KSL News reported that police had visited the Franke home multiple times between March 2019 and August of 2023. At least 5 of those visits involved Child and Family Services. Kevin's statements also focused on Jodi's licensing as a professional mental health counselor, even after years of possible issues, calling for an audit of DOPL, Utah's Division of Professional Licensing, to find out why she was still licensed over these instances of not following professional standards and using the title of a life coach, which isn't even regulated under state law. At the meeting Tuesday, DCFS Director Tanya Myrup responded to the case being discussed, saying the agency's most difficult cases involve families who don't cooperate. And Kevin also gave a brief update on his current fight to get custody of the children back, saying they're still in the process of reunification. We reached out to Kevin's attorney about the latest news. We haven't heard back. Well, joining me right now is Salt Lake City-based criminal defense attorney Sky Lazaro. Sky, thank you so much for coming on. So much to unpack here. What are your initial impressions here? Because obviously it's tragic and it's heartbreaking. But the main question is, should there be a change? Could this have been prevented?
Yeah, this has been a really interesting case to follow. I followed it with KUTV and some other agencies. Something should have been different. I think that is a foregone conclusion. The fact that it got to this level is pretty extreme. He's right that life coaches aren't regulated the same way as mental health providers. So I think I would actually expect to see probably some changes maybe coming from the legislature in response to this case.
Is that because it's so high profile and so egregious what Ruby and Jodi did, and because Kevin is so actively supporting a change here? Is that why we could see a change in Utah law?
I think so. I mean, had this case not happened and no one brought it to attention, I don't think anything would have changed. But this case got a lot of national attention. There's been a lot of criticism on the way it was handled, from everything from DCFS to the way the police investigated it and everything else. So I think given the scrutiny of it and Kevin coming forward and pushing for this change could result in changes. And the weird thing about this case is, I think everybody has a lot of questions. How come Kevin wasn't seeing these kids for all this time that it got to this level?
I'll tell you. Well, at least with Kevin, he has come out and said, in a way, this is the best word to describe. He was manipulated. He was brainwashed by Jodi to believe he was wrong and that he can't even be around the family for a year, that he was a toxic influence. And so in an effort, I'm just reiterating what Kevin has said, in an effort to come back to his family, to have a relationship with Ruby again, he was told to stay away. He was told to not have contact. I know that's very controversial. I know a lot of people have criticized Kevin Franke for that, but that has been one of the reasons. And
but it's understandable.
It's understandable that people have questions. Yeah. I totally get it. I think the question becomes, though, I hope it doesn't take a case like this, and this shouldn't have happened for there to be change. But when I think about it, from a legal point of view, what realistically can be done here?
I mean, depends where you want to start, right? If you want to start with, should life coaches have, this much say, or should they be regulated? I don't know if that fixes the problem. Maybe they should be regulated, but that doesn't get rid of extremism in any sense. You have counselors that can do this sort of thing, family counselors, and until somebody makes a complaint against them, could probably continue to do things like this to people like Kevin, who, believes I think it's understandable that he believes he was doing what was right for his family by, participating in this process, however he was brainwashed to do so. I think the bigger problem isn't about the regulation. I think the bigger problem is within DCFS and the police.
Can we talk
reporting.
about that?
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Like, you can regulate things as much as you want, and you are still going to have people out there who are like Jodi Hildebrandt. You just are.
Well, here's the balancing act, and I wanted to have you on about how the law works here, because it's a balancing, right? You would say, should we make it easier for state services to get involved, to potentially take children away from an abusive home? It shouldn't rise to the level of physical abuse. But then you get into a point, are we interfering in families' lives, right? What is emotional abuse? You say your children to do X, Y, and Z. Is that, or you say something to them, as a way of parenting? Should the government step in there? Should the state step in there? I mean, it's a balancing test about what is right. And obviously, hindsight's 2020. You say, I wish they got involved sooner. I wish the kids were taken away. But that's what complicates it. So how could the law really change here? How could the regulations change here?
Yeah,
DCFS.
I think you're right. It is a balancing act, because by getting involved in the family unit, you're impeding in somebody's right to parent, which is a very protected right. And it requires a high burden. For them to remove children, it requires clear and convincing evidence, which is just short of beyond a reasonable doubt that there's harm to these children. I don't know that there need to be changes as to when children should be removed. I think where I see the breakdown in this case, in what I've reviewed, is if they were being called to this home, there's welfare checks called all the time. People know how to weaponize the system pretty well, with divorces or custody issues or whatever it is. And so I think, sometimes DCFS and law enforcement authorities, they get a little, I don't want to say desensitized, but when a lot of these calls are made, you kind of get to a point where you're like, is there really a problem? Is this a civil issue? Is this something I need to even deal with? But I do think in this case, and I don't remember on the timeline when the last time DCFS was called to that house, but these children were pretty emaciated and pretty abused. So I don't know if it needs to be regulation where it's easier for them to remove children. I wouldn't advocate for that. I think that needs to be an extremely high burden before you can do that. But I do think from an investigative level, maybe there should be some more follow through. Maybe if you're getting multiple reports, you do something to engage services or check in on these kids and physically see them to make sure that everybody's safe, not just knock on the door and, well, nobody answered. I think that creates its own problem.
And I guess the problem is as well, you could, and I think this was brought up in that conversation, we'll check with family, we'll check with friends, we'll check with the school, but they might not know. They might not know what goes on behind closed doors. But what about elevating, and I think you touched upon it a little bit, should it be emotional abuse? Should that be enough?
I think that's a hard one. I think you're going to see, the law is, and I think should stay favoring the family unit. I firmly believe that. I do think that. But in balancing that with the safety of the children, emotional abuse is a huge thing. You're right. If you go, a lot of these kids are conditioned not to talk about it. So the school may never know because they're not going to say anything. They're told not to, or they're told it's normal, or whatever it is, So checking with people, you're right, doesn't always get you there. And I think emotional abuse is a hard one. It's hard to prove. it's hard to recognize and it's hard to prove.
It could be subjective too. Like we can say what physical abuse is. That's easy to show, right? But subjective could be tough. Although, you know, the allegation, it's not even allegations. What they pled guilty to was clearly, these two women, was clearly emotional and psychological and mental abuse. Do you think these efforts on Kevin Franke's part could help or hurt in his fight to get custody of his children?
That's a hard question. You know, if they tighten regulations, it could play against him. You know, I understand his position that he was brainwashed and he was under, you know, Jodi Hildebrandt's spell or whatever it is as well. But, you know, if you're talking about emotional abuse or allowing emotional abuse of your children, even maybe unknowingly or being told that it's in their best interest, that may make things more difficult for him, because while he wasn't participating in what was actively happening, you know, he also at the same time wasn't doing anything.
It's a difficult situation. We'll see what happens. We'll see if the Utah lawmakers make any kind of change after this. Sky Lazaro, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.